Welcome. This is another edition of our season 2 of Present Her. And today it's an absolute privilege, I think, to be able to chat with someone that I've admired for a very long time. Ever since I first met her, that admiration's only gone up. We're talking about former England international, a chemistry major, a lover of the arts, someone who's a multi-World Cup winner, great administrator, great advocate for diversity and for bringing young people from less privileged backgrounds into the game. Surrey, England, and now a much sought after broadcaster, both on radio and television, Ebony Rainford-Brent. Welcome, Ebs. It's an absolute delight.
Thanks, Prakash. You made me blush there with a big build-up, but you know it's always great talking to you. You've got your own real call as well, so honoured to talk to you as always.
So, Ebs, what we want to try and do is really just chat about, how the whole transition has happened. Where was this little girl growing up in a part of South London? What were her dreams as someone who was a tiny 5-7-year-old? The trials and tribulations that you went through, and we know that you did have some very poignant moments in your life, which may have even defined what happened with you. So let's begin at the beginning and tell us about your early childhood, your growing up years, your family, and how you sort of came to the point where, from playing games that you've talked about, like football, basketball, and whatever, which was common in the neighborhood, how did cricket finally find you?
Yeah, so where do I start really? So I grew up,
At
the very beginning. I grew up in an area called sort of Herne Hill, Brixton. Loughborough Junction is the kind of little, any Londoners who might know the area. But it was a very diverse community. So a lot of West Indians have sort of communities had settled there who'd come from the Windrush. So my mum's a Jamaican lady who'd come over maybe the age of 15 and set root. And I loved sort of where I grew up. It was, a very vibrant community. And the one thing I would say is, the sports that are on offer it was pretty much football. Like everyone was obsessed with football. So I had 3 older brothers, which I think helped make me sporty because I was competitive. I wanted to beat them. And, I was just obsessed with football. And, the early years were great. My very early memories were brilliant. And then, I've spoken about a few times, I lost my brother when I was about 5 unfortunately, to knife crime, which was a pretty tough thing for our family. And so what that did for me, I guess, is sport became my release. I struggled to deal with a lot of the emotions as a young kid. So sport was my thing. And I just was obsessed with playing football, like, day in, day out. I'd stay at what you call after school or play centres and just play non-stop, just I guess trying to run all of that out. And it was a bit of luck really that changed my life. It was a guy called Tony Moody who was going into state schools in the inner cities who weren't playing cricket, and suggested I should try. Now I have to be honest, at the age of around sort of 9 or so, I was like, cricket, what's that? It's a bit weird. Like, I'd never seen cricket. The only cricket I'd seen was on TV occasionally, where there were like old white guys in these white clothing drinking tea. And I was just like, what is that? Like, is that a game, or are they just sort of having fun and chilling out, drinking cake and eating cake? Luckily, my teacher sort of persuaded me, give it a go. And the one moment I hit a ball, I remember it was just with a little plastic ball, I was hooked. That was a sort of turning point for me of just, wow, what is this sport? So I played a lot of community stuff. It was me and about 50 boys going down to a local area. And then I finally, through a program, got talent scouted. And that was it. That luck and that experience I had. And then, like I said, getting spotted by a lady called Johnny at Wasdrack, who got me into the structures, changed my life really. Because it introduced me to something that I had no other experience of. When I looked through my later schooling years and my university, and I didn't cross cricket or know people who played. So that one opportunity changed my life.
Yeah, people talk about sort of love at first sight in personal relationships, in relationships with places, with other aspects of life. would it be fair to say that for a 9-year-old girl, just that sort of impact of bat on ball or the fun that you had was exactly that, love at first sight?
It was, I can describe and feel and hear everything of that moment I hit the ball. So it's, we're in a little caged area, so obviously in the city, it was like a little sort of cage. And I can still see the moment, like I can see it in front of my face where I hit it. It was a blue bat, orange ball, and hearing the sound come off the bat. And it's really weird because I don't think there's many things in my life that I have that rooted sensation. So I knew that was it. That became an obsession. And so yeah, love at first sight. If that exists, that was definitely it.
Well, that's a great start to the story, and let's carry on from there. You went from there to Surrey in terms of sort of joining the club in the what is it, the juniors, I presume, and then on to junior England and so on fairly rapidly. But it's also true that not only are you the first black woman to play for England and represent England, but at the time that you went through these early phases of sort of junior cricket and so on, there couldn't have been too many colored girls with you. How was that experience? Because you've also said in stuff that I've read and heard that in many ways cricket was still seen as a bit of an elitist game. It was meant for sort of people maybe in private schools or whatever. And so to be a trailblazer, which you've been, and we'll talk about that as we go along, how hard was it on a young girl, if at all it was, or were you just oblivious to everything and the joy of cricket just carried you through? What was it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've spoken quite a lot recently how cricket's always felt like a different world to me, to my normal life or my London life. London, like I said, first of all, it's very diverse. It's very multicultural, very understanding of difference and integrated. And I think as soon as I walked into the cricket bubble, you could see the lack of awareness and cultural awareness, and that sort of leaked through comments, which I've spoken quite recently about just how difficult it was at times of comments about food, hair, your backside, just keep the comments just kept coming. Some really nasty, some just maybe not used to being part of or seeing difference. But I found it quite hard. I found it quite isolating at times. One thing I would say, in some ways I was lucky, myself and Isha Gua, so maybe while we'll talk later about some of the work that I've done, is the community I grew up with was full of lots of different kids from different ethnicities playing, who were very talented and very good and also loved the game as much as I did. But it was like they were left behind for this different world, which was very elitist, had different values, different ways of expressing itself. So I think that's why I do so much now, because I know people love the game. I've traveled around the world and know it's nothing to do with skin color or background, whether you love the game or not. And so those kind of early pains, I suppose, and feeling isolated, maybe drive me to do some of the stuff that I do now.
No, and we are going to talk about that because that's an important part. I just have one other aspect. I'm just going to probe a little bit here, Ebbs. In terms of you've said that some of the comments and some of the sort of critique may have been innocent or just not being exposed. But you've also talked about when you talked about the whole Black Lives Matter piece, and we'll talk about that later on as well. You've talked about almost a drip system where it was maybe a little bit, but it was there all the time. It was a kind of omnipresent. Do you think it was just a reflection of the times? Or was it that, because I'm just trying to figure that in a setup like England cricket, where there is obviously a lot of understanding, education, knowledge, all of that exists, was this seen and tolerated? And I don't want to get controversial about this, but was it seen and tolerated, or was it that it was okay, this is part of the game, you just got to take it on the chin, move on, and just show how good you are? Maybe your yardstick.
Yeah, I think the most dangerous thing that I think happens, and it maybe happens in a lot of sports teams anyway, is it gets labelled as banter. So a comment could be made around your race, which is completely inappropriate. Others would hear it, and if you were to challenge it, it's an easy get out to say, oh, it's just banter. And I think that banter label I've seen many times push against sexist comments, racist comments, inappropriate comments, full stop. And the sports world just has this thing sometimes, well, definitely say the worlds that I've been in, where that is acceptable. And even if people see it and know in that moment that's the wrong thing to say, it's an easy defense to say, oh, it's your problem the way you're responding to it. I was only joking. And so the problem is, if you're the only one in an environment, there's no others standing up for you. So then that's where you kind of just take it on the drip feed, you laugh it off. Your confidence and self-esteem wears away a little bit because you're not challenging, which is something that I regret about myself. I mean, I'm not sure if it would have worked, but I do sometimes think so. I wish if I had that energy to have, gone back and told some people where to go, because I didn't. But you're also trying to get selected. You're also trying to stay part of the team. So it's a really difficult dynamic. But that's what I say that I see a lot of that still exists now, and it's an easy way to get out of saying a really bad comment. It was banter. I'm just joking. Get over it. Why are you over? And that's a problem that I think needs to be really dug into in changing rooms and environments within our game.
Yeah, and it's not just sport. I mean, it's life in general, isn't it? Everywhere, whether it's corporate boardrooms or it's, business or society or life in general. We'll digress just for a minute and come back to your journey, and we'll revisit some of the work that you're doing, which is so meaningful. But as you sort of graduated to playing for England juniors and so on, from a pure sporting perspective, the injuries aspect came to you fairly early in life as well. And that was almost a body blow, quite literally, which threatened to cut short not just a cricketing life, but your personal life. And I know in our conversations, you've talked a lot about how that whole sort of challenge was taken up, how your family helped you. But just walk us through it, Ebony, because I think it's very important for younger people, especially who may be listening, how you overcome adversity. And you're a great example of how to do that. So please, if you would.
Yeah, injuries are, well, they can be a wipeout for you. I suppose I'd start with, so my back was my major issue. I think when I was about 16, because I was a fast bowler and actually started my England career as a fast bowler, which didn't finish because of my back. But I remember sort of having a few issues, sort of cramping up and seizing up, and I spoke to a physio who didn't take it seriously, said, oh, your age, I'm sure you're fine, you're good. So I just kind of kept battling along for a few years with this sort of injury. I maybe had a bit of a mixed action as well, which those days they weren't so all about the bio sort of technicalities and angles and stuff. So I was battling along. I remember being sort of around 19, so I just started university, and I got a call to join the full England side just for some training sessions. Went down thinking, this is like my moment to shine. I'm going to run in and charge in as fast as I can. I remember bowling a few balls and just feeling a little bit, my back was not quite great. Charged in again a few more, and something was off. So I tried to find a way to excuse myself, got him a little Ford Fiesta and came back home. And as I bent down to pick up the remote, it was just like the worst pain ever. I just sort of collapsed. But from that moment, I never actually walked properly again for another year and some. I didn't realize I had, prolapsed discs, pars defects. I had all these different problems that later got diagnosed, and the pain was so crippling, nerve pain going down my leg, all that sort of stuff. I couldn't sit up. I had to leave university, which was pretty difficult. I was told, I remember when the doctor looked at the scan and I was with my mum, she said that most of you will never play sport again, there's too much damage, and started talking about potential for paralysis, and if you get these, and I just remember being like, what is going on? This is horrific. And I kind of just went into a dark place, really. I was sort of lying in bed in dark rooms, not doing very little for about a year, because we'd seen doctors, seen chiropractor. There wasn't a huge amount of funding available to talk about the operation. It was all too far away. So I just kind of went into mentally a dark place. I felt like I'd lost everything, no income, no university, no sport. But the one thing I would say, and this is why it's so good to have good people around you, my brother, Dominic, he's often my go-to, but also quite a harsh talker. I remember he sparked something mentally inside me, which was, he said, he had a go at me and F words came out, I have to be honest. And he sort of said, listen, you're choosing to accept the doctor's reality and belief about what's possible for you. And I was like, yeah, but look at what it says, look at all the detail. This is saying that. And he said, but you're choosing that. Like, you can choose to fight that diagnosis. You can choose to find ways around it. And at the same time, my mum was giving me all these motivational DVDs, which is very sweet of her. She was just trying to get me up. And I remember listening to these Tony Robbins CDs while my brother was kind of telling me this. And I would say this process that next happened is mostly the biggest thing that's happened in terms of developing mental steel. Over the period of 3 years, I started listening to these tapes. I wrote my goals up on the wall, and one of them was to play in the World Cup. So bearing in mind, I hadn't played for the full England team yet, and my dream was to come back and be on that plane for the 2009 World Cup. And it took a year to get back to walking properly, a year to get back to sort of running properly. And during that year, I started getting support. A lady called Barbara Downey's got some funding, and then another year where I then made it and sort of progressed. And so, you know, the mental shift I went through in that phase, which is starting to learn what is possible, realizing that you need people around you who are going to challenge thought process and what's possible for you and what you're capable of. And also having a dream. I think that dream to play, and also I wanted to come back and finish chemistry and get a master's in it, which I did. Those dreams written up and looking at them every day, I still write down my goals now, are one of the most empowering things I've ever done. So I just sort of say to anyone, one, your mind is capable of so much. I believe in healing. One thing I would say as well is I didn't go down the traditional Western route. It didn't work for me, but I did a lot of Eastern medicine and chiropractic care and stuff like that as well. And that was a game changer. So always try and look for opportunities, but also that mental grit about belief and what you want to achieve. It really makes a difference. It completely changed my life.
Absolutely. Very, very, it's moving. Every time I hear this, it's moving. But at the same time, Ebony, as you lay there and you were getting this sort of almost two different kinds, right? There's the mother's love, and there is probably a more practical sibling who's going to push you to say, listen, you can't accept this. Yet, the decision's got to be made within Ebony. No one else is going to make it. And it's going to happen sort of between the years, right? It's the mind that's going to have to control this. Were there moments, even as you began that journey to return to England colours, or the early part of the hard work in rehab? Because many a times you see the end result. You see, okay, Ebony injured, trouble, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. She's back in England colours. Okay, she did well. She fought through it. But talk to us just a little bit about the self-doubt that can creep in, the efforts that you make, and when you don't get that immediate result, right? Because I think that's where it all boils down to, those little wins every day.
I think the number one thing is that self-doubt is there every day, and it's almost like you have to be able to hold the long vision at the same time of take little wins. So, you know, I'm talking my little win. First of all, I couldn't walk. When I started seeing the chiropractor, he would adjust me, and I maybe had about half an hour of walking or an hour walking that day. That was such a major milestone, and that feels like miles away from being able to perform on an international stage. So one is like just enjoying the little process of the little wins. There were many times I thought I was being an idiot. I'll tell you when I thought I was being an idiot is every time I had a back spasm, because, you know, I still have back problems now, years later. It's not like this is something that has disappeared. And every time you have a back spasm, you will set back. But what I noticed is that I might recover in 3 days instead of 2 weeks, or, you know, what it is, it was getting better. So obviously taking enjoyment out of the little wins. The biggest thing I've learned, and it's a process I've learned about, is called the cycle of renewal, is it pretty much says we're inevitably going to be thrown some adversity, but the quality of questions we ask ourselves is the difference in how we and how quickly we come back. So when I look at my early days of that year of depression and lying in bed, the quality of questions were, why did this happen to me? You know, I thought the world was better than this. You know, all those questions had no real ending that was going to do anything positive. Whereas the flip side now is a process of, okay, what could I do today that could move me forward? What could I do? Who could I speak to that might inspire me? What advice? And all those sort of forward-looking questions when you're in a healthy place can help you start to make some really positive change. So I think I had to shift my mindset from looking at the negatives to just trying to find any little bit of inspiration that was possible and moving forward. And I think that's the cycle with depression, is it's a really bad mental state that you go round and round in. Whereas this way round, I learned how to go through that cycle and really ask better questions, which move me forward. So I'd say that the self-doubt creeped in when I first played when I got back to finally made my England debut, my back went again and I was out for nearly a year. So it wasn't that it was an easy ride. I then had to build back up towards the World Cup, and I went off to Australia in the winter, and it was a tough time. But I think that little bit of belief and that finding your inner steel, which no one can give you but yourself, unfortunately. No one can teach you that little bit of grit. I think we all have it. Sometimes we just have to have it exposed through adversity. So yeah, I would say those constant doubts are there, and I think anything I do, I doubt. But it's also learning how to sit alongside the fear. So every time I ran up to bowl, there would be a fear that I'm going to have a spasm and be back in hospital. But then I had to say, look, if I've done the groundwork, I have to just trust and go alongside this fear, and that's the only way you can get through it.
And do you think that the fact that your career in actually representing England for the period that you did could have been a much longer playing career if you didn't have the severity of the injuries, which, even though you overcame them, somewhere probably impeded your progress and your ability to consistently deliver? Would that be something that would be fair to say?
Yeah, I think for a lot of reasons. I think I would have mostly started a bit earlier. I think when 19 and I was called up to that training environment before my back went, I might have got in a few years earlier. I think my mind would have been a bit freer. I think I spent most of my career just with that nervousness. If I play this shot, if I do this, is this going to happen? I was playing along someone like Catherine Brunt, who's still in the team, Danny Wyatt, Tammy Beaumont, and I look and they're still going strong. Similar age to Catherine Brunt. I think, how many caps could I have had? How many runs potentially? Yeah, I think that injury really did. But the one thing I would say that I'm mostly more proud of is actually developing that mindset, like what it taught me as a person, what it took to go through that, and the battles, and also, sometimes critics and people who don't believe in you too. To have had some sort of career, wasn't huge, but enough of a career, and to have faced those battles, I think in some ways it's more meaningful because it didn't come easy. It was something that, you had to really fight for.